Alright, what daf we up to over here? Ua. Oh. Ua. Gewaltig. Ua. This is such geschmack stuff. Hey friends. What's up and welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying daf 5 of Masechta Yevamos. Friends, what do you want me to tell you? Daf Hey is geschmack. You know, I'll tell you friends, daf Beis and daf Gimel, I had a hard time with them. Daf Dalet and daf Hey and, you know, the other daf since then, particularly daf Beis was very hard. You know, I'll tell you, I get a little nervous because I feel like Yevamos at any point can just like explode at you, you know? But in the meantime, these dafs are geschmack. Anyways, we're continuing our discussion of Ahsay dokhe. How should I say it? Ahsay dokhe, not sahsay. I don't know. I'm an amateur over here. I'm a modern Orthodox Jew trying to be yeshivish. You know, I'm doing my best. Well, I'm not trying to be yeshivish. I'm just trying to be funny. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, you know. All right, what do you want me to tell you? My mom thinks I'm not funny. Oh, what's this? That's just because I don't tell her the good jokes. Anyways, let's go weiter. So, Akuponim. So we're continuing in our discussion of how do we know that Ahsay is dokhe lo sahsay? We saw yesterday that from essentially Tana Dever Bishmal that we proved based on tzitzis that when it says lo silba shatnes tzemeru fishtim yachdav, tzemeru fishtim was extra because it already said a different pasuk. It said beged, and beged means already tzemeru fishtim, whatever it is. So we're able to learn it according to Tana Dever Bishmal that from the silba shatnes tzemeru fishtim yachdav gdilim taiselach, that because it says tzitzis right after when it says don't wear shatnes, so memele it means that you could wear you can make tzitzis even if it's shatnes. That the mitzvah Ahsay, the positive commandment of making tzitzis, overrides the negative commandment of do not wear shatnes. So we see Ahsay dokhe lo ta'asay. We are going to continue our discussion of how do we know that, and and some other details there as well. And of course, the whole point, the context of this discussion is, of course, tying back to Yibum, because we know that you would not do Yibum if it means marrying your wife's sister, right? If it means doing Yibum with your wife's sister. And we know that that would not be allowed because it says Aleha by Yibum and it says Aleha by the erva, by the prohibition of sleeping with your wife's sister. And therefore, because of the Gezerah Shava, that is, right, it says Aleha by Yibum, Aleha by erva of Achos Isha. And therefore, that's how we know that you would not do Yibum if it's your wife's sister. Now, the assumption being that if we did not have the Gezerah Shava, well then we would assume that you would do Yibum in that case. And the question is why? And we want to say, well, it's because Ahsay dokhe lo ta'asay, that a positive commandment of Yevamo yavo aleh would override the negative commandment of, against sleeping with one's wife's sister. So now, frek the Gemara, top of Daf Hey Amud Aleph, Teinach, the Tana Dever Bishmal. So says the Gemara, look, it's all fine and good according to the Tana Dever Bishmal, who learns that whenever the Torah says beged, so that means memele means tzemeru fishtim. It means wool and linen. And therefore, I didn't need the pasuk to teach me lo silba shatnes tzemeru fishtim yachtav, because I already had the pasuk that says uveged kilayim shatnes liyayla alecho, and therefore the tzemeru fishtim over there is extra. So therefore, it's extra to teach us that you're allowed to have shatnes and tzitzis, that the Ahsay of Gedilim Taisalach overrides the Lo Ta'asay of Lo Silbash Shatnis. That's all fine and good according to the Tanat Rabbi Shmuel, who says that Beged means Tzemer Ufishtim, wool and linen. But L'Rabbanon Minalahu. But how do the rabbis who say that Beged does not mean wool and linen, and therefore when the pasuk says Lo Silba Shatnes Tzemer Ufishtim Yachtov, we need it to say wool and linen, because otherwise I don't know that a Beged is wool and linen. So the rabbis need those words of Tzemer Ufishtim. Well then, if they need the words, well then, I guess those words aren't extra to teach that Ahsay dokhe lo ta'asay. So then how do the rabbis then know Ahsay dokhe lo ta'asay? So, and for the Gemara, nafkulu me rosho. They learn enough out from the word rosho, that by a mitzora, you have a friend who is a leper, and let's say this, he was a leper, and now he's pure. And it says that on the 7th day of his purification, so they gotta shave the fellow bald. They shave his head, they shave his face. It all must go. So what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says, I'm reading this in the pasuk, not in the Gemara. Vaya bayom hashvi, it'll be on day 7. Yigalach es kol sayro, you have to get rid of all of his hair. Es rosho, his head. Vezikano, his beard. Vezgabos einov, his eyebrows. Whew. Ves kol sayro, yigalech, all of his hair. So now, fact the Gemara, so the Tanya rosho matamud lomar. How come the pasuk needs to say his head? Kilu, it already says Yigalachas Kosairo. It already says that we're going to get rid of all of his hair. Memele, if you're going to get rid of all of his hair, obviously you're getting rid of the hair on his head. So why does the pasuk have to say Rosho? How come the pasuk has to mention his head? I know his head. We're getting rid of all the hair. Obviously that includes his head. So Lefi Shenemar, because the pasuk says Lo Sakifu Pas Roshchem. Well, we have another pasuk that says, don't shave off your payas. So Shemea Ani Af Mitzorakin. So therefore I would assume, if you're not allowed to shave off your payas, right, the corners of your head, so then I would think that even a Mitzorah is not allowed to shave off his payas. And therefore, so Talmud Omar, Rosho. Therefore, the pasuk says, Rosho, his head, that no, Yitaka do shave off even the payas. That when it says Yigalachas Kol Sayro, the positive commandment of removing all the hair from this mitzorah in the purification process, that is dokhe, it overrides the negative commandment, the mitzvah lo sahsay, of lo sakifu pas roshchem, of do not cut off your payas. Because over Aitana, and this Tana holds hakafas kol harosh ma'akafa, that removing all of the hair of your head is called hakafa, is included in the prohibition of lo sakifu pas roshchem, of do not remove your payas, because I may have thought to say that no, that what the pasuk means, don't remove your payas, it means don't only remove your payas. If you keep all your hair, but you specifically cut off, the parts of your face and head that you're not allowed to cut off, maybe that's a problem. But if you cut off all your hair, maybe it's not a problem. So no, so this Tana holds that cutting off all your hair is a problem, and even so, still a Mitzorah, when he is done with his purification process, he cuts off all of his hair, including all the hair of his head, including his payas. So we see that Ahsay dokhe lo ta'asay, that the Ahsay of Yigalachas Kol Sayro, that he removes all of his hair, overrides the mitzvah lo sahsay of lo sakifu pas roshchem. Alright, fine. One second, not so fast. Maybe I cannot generalize from there that Ahsay is dokhe lo ta'asay, because I can ask malalav da'akofe, that when it comes to the negative commandment against removing your payas, shekin lav she'ein shove bakol. 1 second. It is a negative commandment that doesn't apply to everybody, because it is a commandment upon men, that men have this negative commandment that they're not allowed to remove their payas, that doesn't apply to women. And therefore, it's not a global prohibition. It's not a global law. As opposed to, as Rashi points out, it says when it, right by erva, it says hanefashos ha'osos, that anybody, right, that both the man and the woman get in trouble when it comes to erva, and therefore I cannot generalize from the Mitzorah. I cannot generalize that Ahsay is dokhe lo ta'aseh, because this is specifically a situation that doesn't apply to everybody. So it's only for men, at least specifically the payas part. Ela asya mizikono. Okay, so let's learn it out from the following example, that it says, right? It says, what is it? As Yigalach is called Saira, as Rosho vezkono, and also his bard, also his beard. Ditani zikono matamud lomar. How come he has to say his beard? Kilu, if we already said that he's got to get rid of all of his hair, so Memele gets rid of his beard. So the Fishenemar, because the pasuk says Ufaz zikonim lo yigalechu, because it says by a kohen, that they are not allowed to shave their beards. So Shomea ani av kohen mitzorakein. So I might think that if a kohen is not allowed to shave his beard, so even when he's a mitzorah, he's not allowed to shave his beard, and so I might think that. Therefore, we need the pasuk to say ve'ez zikano, right? Also his beard, from which we learn that even in the context of a kohen who was a mitzorah, still he would remove his beard, even though there is a negative commandment of ufas zikanim lo yigalechu, that they should not remove their the corners of their beard. So tamalom zikano, therefore it says the corners of their beard. Ve'einu inyan the lav she'ein shave bakol, and if we do not need to teach that in Ahsay is dokhe lo ta'aseh, in a situation that does not apply to everybody, because we already learned that out by the first example of Rosho, right? Meaning we just learned a minute ago from the word Rosho that a Mitzorah removes all the hair of his head, even though there's a lo ta'aseh of lo sakifu pas roshchem. And we said, now that is a situation of a lav she'enu shaveh lakol, that is a situation of a negative commandment that does not apply to everybody. And then we have this next, but the pasuk continues and says v'ez zikano, and his beard, from which we're saying that even a kohen who's a mitzorah would shave his beard. And obviously we don't need, right, the chiddush over here is not to teach me about a lav she'ein shaveh how do I say this? A lav she'ein shaveh bakol. It's not, I don't need it to teach me about a negative commandment that doesn't apply to everybody, because I already know that from the first part of the verse, when it was talking about the payas, which only applies to men. So therefore, Taneu inyan the lav hashave bakol. So therefore, what we should learn out from when we say that the kohen shaves his beard, even though there is a negative commandment against shaving his beard, what we're learning out is not talking about alav she'enu shaveh bakol, a negative commandment that doesn't apply to everybody, because we know that from the first part of the pasuk. Rather, let's say that what we can learn from here is to generalize that in Ahsay is dokhe lo ta'aseh, even in a situation where it does apply to everybody, even in a situation where it is universal, we would still say Ahsay is dokhe lo ta'aseh. But says the Gemara ba'akati itztur. Says the Gemara, wait, no, we cannot generalize from the verse of a mitzorah who's a kohen, because even though the first part of the verse taught me that in a situation where there is a negative commandment that does not apply to everybody, like shaving off your payas, still we say Ahsay dokhe lo ta'aseh, that would not necessarily teach me that in the context of a kohen who's a mitzorah, that he would be able to shave his beard, because Sakadaite Chamina, because I may have thought shiny Kohanim hold riba boyan akos of mitzvahs yiseris, that maybe Kohanim are different because Kohanim have lots of different mitzvahs, lots of special commandments, and I might think that they're in their own category. And therefore, even though we have the first part of the verse that says that in a situation where you have a negative commandment that does not apply to everybody, like do not shave your payas, which only applies to men, and the pasuk says nonetheless a mitzorah does shave his head, that would not necessarily teach me that a kohen who's a mitzorah also shaves his beard, because I might think that a kohen is more stringent. There's lots of special halachis when it comes to a kohen, and maybe therefore, because on account of this verse that says ufas zikanim lo yigalechu, that they do not shave the corners of their beard, so I might think that actually a kohen who's a mitzorah would not shave his beard. So afilu lav she'in shaveh bakol lo dokhe. So I might think that even when it comes to a lav that does not apply to everybody, I might think that in the context of a kohen, the Ahsay of the mitzorah removing all of his head, I might think would not override the verse by the kohen that says that he should not remove the corners of his beard. And therefore I might think that a kohen does not shave his beard if he's a mitzorah. So kamash malan, therefore the pasuk needs to say there's zikano to teach me that even a kohen who has all of these special stringencies, still when he's a mitzorah he does shave all of his hair, including his beard, even though it says that in general a kohanim would not remove the corners of their face. But nonetheless, we would say that the Ahsay of Yigalachas Kol Sairo overrides the Lo Ta'aseh of Ufaz Zikanim Lo Yigalechu, and even a Kohen who has all of the extra stringencies still would shave his beard when he is a pure mitzorah, a mitzorah who has become pure. So Ella. So therefore it teaches that, right, that it is dokhe. Fine. So we still do not know how to generalize the halacha of Ahsay dokhe lo ta'aseh. We can't learn it out from the word rosho. We can't learn it out from zikano. So the Gemara says actually we can learn it out from the word rosho. That when it says in the pasuk that on the seventh day of his purification he shaves his head, he shaves all of his hair and his head. So, but it comes from the word rosho, his head, from the following brisa. The Tanyas, we learn in the brisa, rosho matam lomar. How come it says that he has to shave, that a mitzorah on the seventh day of his purification he shaves his head? I mean, after all, it says yigalachas kol sairo, right? He's got to remove all of his hair. Memele, it includes his head. So the Fishanemer tar lo yavra rosho, well, because the pasuk says by a nazir, tar lo yavra rosho, that he cannot put a razor to his head, right? He's not allowed to cut his hair. So shomea ani af mitzorah v'nazir kain, right? If you have a nazir who is a mitzorah, so I might think, look, it says by Nazir, tar lo yavra rosho, he's not allowed to remove any of the hair of his head. So I might think that, okay, when you have a Nazir who's a mitzorah, he doesn't shave his head. So tamuloma rosho, therefore the pasuk says rosho, to say that even a Nazir who is a mitzorah would shave his head, even though it says by a Nazir that he does not cut his hair. Nonetheless, if he's a mitzorah, he does cut his hair, so we see that Ahsay is dokhe lo ta'aseh, to which the Gemara says, Zika lemifrach, no, not so fast. You can ask, ma lenazir mitzorah shekin yeshno b'sheila. I might think that a nazir who is a mitzorah, so he shaves his head on day 7 of his purification, because a nazir is kind of a little bit more lenient, right? Because after all, he makes a neder, right? He makes a vow that he's going to be a nazir, but if he wants, he can always go to a sage and annul that vow and undo that vow and undo his nazirus, and he's no longer a nazir. So I might think to say that, look, because ultimately a Nazir can undo his Nazirus, it's not super strict, there's always a way out of it, so therefore it's a more lenient situation, and maybe that is why we say that Ahsay is dokhe lo tasay, and that is why we say that when a Nazir is a Mitzorah, so then on day 7 he shaves all of his hair, even though it says that that a Nazir in general doesn't cut his hair, but because a Nazir is a little bit more lenient after all, he can always go to a sage and just undo his whole Nazir thing and not be a Nazir anymore. And if you don't say like this, Kilu, I'll prove it to you that a Nazir is a more lenient case. Hadekaimal, on that which we hold, that when, right, we have a general rule that while a positive commandment can override a negative commandment, nonetheless a positive commandment does not override a negative commandment when it's together with when it also has a positive commandment, right? Ein Ahsay dokhe lo tasay ve'asay, right? That a positive commandment, the mitzvah Ahsay, is unable to override an Ahsay and lo tasay combo. Right? When you have a combination of an Ahsay and a lo tasay, so then one Ahsay does not override it, right? And after all, by Nazir it says on the one hand tar lo. What does it say? It says tar lo nu tar liyava rosho, and it says kadosh yeh gadol peres rosho, right? So one of them says do not cut your hair, and the other one says grow out your hair, right? So by a Nazir there is a negative commandment and there's also a positive commandment. So elami Nazir my time lo gaminon. So wait, where am I? Okay, I skipped 2 words, right? But one second, but why don't we learn from Nazir that actually in that in Ahsay is dokhe lo ta'asay and in Ahsay, right? In general, we say that a positive commandment does not override a negative commandment that's paired together with a positive commandment. Yet, when it comes to a Nazir, we see that the positive commandment, when he is a Mitzorah, it says, if you have a Nazir who's a Mitzorah, so it says, Yigalachas kol sayro, that he shaves off all of his hair, which is a positive commandment, and that overrides the positive and negative commandments by Nazir of tar lo yavor al rosho, that he does not cut his hair, and also it says kadosh yeh gadol peres rosho, that he grows out his hair. So there's a negative commandment and there's a positive commandment, and yet we see that the positive commandment of yigalachas kol sayro overrides the lo sahsay and the Ahsay. So therefore, in general, we say that a mitzvah Ahsay is not dokhe lo tasay ve'asay. However, why don't I ask the question and say, but what do you mean? We see by a Nazir that the Ahsay of, when you have a Nazir who's a Mitzorah, so the Ahsay of Yigalachas kol sayro seems to be overriding the lo ta'asay and the Ahsay of the Nazir. So ela mi Nazir my time lo gamrinon. How come we do not learn out from the Nazir against the concept of ein Ahsay dokhe lo ta'asay v'asay de'ikol mifrach? Because you can always ask sheken yeshnu b'sheila, because Nazir is a particularly lenient case, since he's always able to go to a sage and just basically not be a Nazir anymore. So here also we'll say the same thing, that we cannot generalize that Ahsay is dokhe lo tasay from the fact that it says Yigalachas kol sayro by a Nazir, and it says Yigalach kol sayro by a Mitzorah, and that seems to override tar lo yale al ro liyavra rosho, right? So even though by a Nazir, the positive commandment by Mitzorah of cutting his hair overrides the negative commandment against a Nazir cutting his hair, nonetheless, we cannot generalize from there that Ahsay is dokhe lo tasay, since a Nazir is a particularly lenient case in that he can always just stop being a Nazir by going to a sage and asking him to undo his Nazirite stuff. So rather, and for the Gemara, La'olam Mikra Kama. Really, we learn it out from the initial pasuk of Tzitzis, where it says, L'suba Shatnez Tzemer Fishtim Yachtav Gedilim Taiselach, that it says, don't wear Shatnez, make Tzitzis, and from which we learn out that the positive commandment of making tzitzis overrides the negative commandment of shatnez, because after all, even according to the rabbis, right, of course, according to the Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, so he says, well, beged already teaches me wool and linen. Why does it say tzemer ufishtim? That's extra. According to the rabbis, they don't assume that beged includes tzemer ufishtim, wool and linen, so we need the pasuk to say wool and linen. That's how I know that we're talking about wool and linen, according to the rabbis. But nonetheless, we could still say that lo suba shatnez tzemer ufishtim yachtov gedilim taiselach means that you can make tzitzis of shatnez, and that Ahsay is dokhe lo ta'asay, because imkein le'makra tzitzis taiselach. That really the Torah should just say, lo suba shatnez tzemer ufishtim yachtov tzitzis taiselach. How come it says gedilim taiselach? That's kind of a strange word. As I translated here, it means twined fringes. Who knows what twined fringes are? It's a strange word. So gedilim taise so gedilim lamali. How come it says twined fringes? So shmamina la'afnuye. It must mean that it's extra to learn that the Ahsay of tzitzis is dokhe lo ta'asay of lo silba shatnez. But in fact, the Gemara, what do you mean? Gedilim, twined fringes, isn't just extra to teach me that you can make tzitzis of shatnez. We need gedilim, twined fringes, to teach me certain measurements, certain halachas. Gedil shnaim, that I guess apparently a twine is 2. Gedilim, now a plural of a twine is therefore arba is 4. I say gedil fosleu mitocho. I don't know, you make like a gedil and then make it like a tassel and then, I don't know, strings at the bottom. Basically, somehow from there we learn out that there's 2 and then plus another, right, times 2 is 4, and then you like double it over from the corner and let it hang down, so that's like 8. Alright. No, so we see that that when it says gedilim taiselach, we actually need it to say gedilim, because that's how we learn out like the number of strings and stuff. So then it doesn't seem like there's anything extra to teach me that the Ahsay of tzitzis is dokhe lo ta'asay of shatnez. Imkein le'makra lo silba shatnez tzemer ufishtim. So still though, enochanami, we need the word gedilim, we need tzemer ufishtim to teach me that we're talking about wool and linen, but still I could have stopped after tzemer ufishtim, yachtov lamali. Right, it says, lo silba shatnez tzemer ufishtim yachtov. What's with the word yachtov? I don't need the word yachtov. Lamali, how come it's there? Shmamina la'afnuye. It's extra to teach me to say that the Ahsay of tzitzis is dokhe lo ta'asay of shatnez va'akati miboyle. But still, no, we need it. The tochiv shtei tchifos chibur u'tchifa achas eno chibur. No, still, I need the word yachtov to teach me that in terms of kilayim, it's only kilayim when you kind of like stick 2 you take like a needle and you, I don't know, I guess sew 2 stitches. I guess that's considered stitching things together. That would be enough for it to be shatnez. Okay, fine. So we need the word yachtov together. Imkein lichtov rachmana lo silbash tzemer ufishtim yachtov shatnez lamali shmamina la'afnuye. So then the Gemara wants to say, okay, fine. So we need tzemer ufishtim, we need yachtov, we need gedilim, but maybe we don't need it to say shatnez. Maybe we could just say lo silbash tzemer ufishtim yachtov. Don't wear wool and linen together. Shatnez lamali. Why do I need the special word shatnez? Shmamina la'afnuye. It must be that the word shatnez is extra to teach me that the Ahsay of tzitzis is dokhe lo ta'asay of shatnez. But va'akati miboyle, no, I need the word shatnez. Hachiyeh shua tavi v'nos. From the word shatnez, I learn out that the garment, that the wool and the linen needs to be smooth, spun and woven. Okay, so I need the word shatnez as well. Elekulam shatnez nafke. So we learn out everything from shatnez, both the fact that it's extra and that it needs to be smooth, spun and woven, because as Rashi points out, that if the only thing was that we have an extra word, right, we're saying that the word shatnez is extra. We don't really need it, right? So if the only point over here was that we have an extra word, so it could have said lo silbash kilayim, and the word kilayim would be extra, and from there we would learn out that the asay of tzitzis is dokhe the lo asay of kilayim. But it doesn't say lo silbash kilayim, it says lo silbash shadnes to teach us both things, that it needs to be shua tavi v'nose, smooth, spun and woven, but also that it's extra, and that we can learn that nasay is dokhe a lo ta'asay. In fact, the Gemara ashkechon dasi essay v'dachi lo sahsay greda. Okay, fine. No. So friends, so what have we seen so far? So we've seen like step 1. Mazel tov. Shkoyach. We've proven that tzitzis can be made, you can make tzitzis even shatnez. That nasay is dokhe lo ta'asay. But friends, when it comes to yibum, we're talking about arayos. Arayos is not just any asay. It's an asay. It's not just any lo ta'asay. It's a lo ta'asay that if you do it, you're chayiv karis. That's kind of more serious, more severe than wearing kilayim, than wearing shatnez. And therefore, effectively, Gemara ashkechon dasi esay v'dachi lo sahsay greda. Fine. So we've proven that a positive commandment can override a negative commandment. But lo taiseh sheish bo karis hechi ashkechon dedachi. But how do I know that even a negative commandment that has kares, like sleeping with your wife's sister, how do I know that a positive commandment would override that? The itzturich aleh lemisrei, that we need the gezer shava of aleh by your wife's sister and aleh by yibum, to say that even in the context of yibum, you are not allowed to be miyabim your wife's sister, because I would have thought without the gezer shava that the asay of yevamo yavo aleh would override the lo ta'asay of not sleeping with your wife's sister. But how do I know that we would say asay dokhe lo ta'asay in that case? Because it's a lo ta'asay that has kares. So v'chitema ne'elif mimila. Maybe you'll say, well, let's learn it out from bris milah, that you can do bris milah on Shabbos, and Shabbos is right. We say lo sahsay kol melacha. Don't do melacha on Shabbos, and if you do melacha, you're chayiv kares. So it's a lav that has a chiyuv kares, and still the asay of bris milah is doche that lav. But ma'lamila shekenichusu aleh shlosh eser brisos. But by bris milah it says there are 13 covenants mentioned in the pasuk of in the parsha of bris milah, which makes bris milah particularly significant, and it's not surprising that it's doche even a lo ta'asay that has kares associated with it, i.e. that it's doche Shabbos mi Pesach. So maybe we'll learn it out from Korban Pesach, that we offer the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. So it's an asay, mitzvah asay, to offer the Korban Pesach, and we do that even on Shabbos, which it says lo ta'asay kol melacha, which is a negative commandment that has kares associated with it. But ma'ale Pesach shekein kares. But Pesach is also particularly stringent, because if you neglect to offer the Korban Pesach, you're chayiv kares for that. And therefore, while yes, you're chayiv kares for violating the lo ta'asay of lo ta'asay kol melacha on Shabbos, but also the positive commandment to bring the Korban Pesach is a particularly significant positive commandment, in that if you don't offer the Korban Pesach, you're chayiv kares, which is not the case by yibum. If you don't do yibum, you're not chayiv kares. So maybe, while in the case of, maybe by Korban Pesach, it's doche Shabbos because it's very, very significant. Because if you neglect to offer the Korban Pesach, you're going to be chayiv kares for that. Maybe that, but by yibum, I wouldn't necessarily know that you would do yibum even in a situation when it's your wife's sister where there's a chiyuv kares. So mitamid ma'alutamid shekein tadir. And maybe we'll say, well, you offer the Korban Tamid on Shabbos. So we see that the asay of Korban Tamid is doche the lo ta'asay of Shabbos that has kares associated, but Korban Tamid you do every single day. That makes it its kind of own thing. And I can sort of understand why it would be doche Shabbos, because you do it every day. So mechada lo asya teisi mitarte. So maybe now the Gemara suggests, okay, fine. So we can't learn it out from Bris Milah on its own. We can't learn it out from Pesach, Korban Pesach on its own. We can't learn it out from Korban Tamid on its own. But maybe we can sort of group two of those things together, and then those two together could maybe form a basis for us to be able to say that Ahsay is dokhe lo tasay in general, even when the lo tasay has kares associated with it. But hey tesi, from which two are you going to make that proof from? Mimila u Pesach, you're going to group together Bris Milah and Korban Pesach, Shekain Kares. But both by Bris Milah and by Korban Pesach, they are positive commandments that if you neglect to do them, there's a chiyuv kares associated with them, which is not the case by Yibum. Mi Pesach v'Tamid, maybe you'll group together Korban Pesach and Korban Tamid, Shekin Tzorich Gavoa, but those are both korbanos that go to the Eibishter, which is not the case by Yevamos. Mi Milah v'Tamid, what? Maybe you're going to suggest to learn it out from Bris Milah and Korban Tamid, Shekin Yeshno Lifnei Adibor. But both the Korban Tamid and Bris Milah were already before Matan Torah. According to the opinion that we saw in Masechta Chagiga, that the Ola offering that was offered in the desert was a Korban Tamid. So in that case, Bris Milah and Korban Tamid were already before Matan Torah, which is not the case by Yevamos. And in fact, also we would be unable to learn out from all three of them together, because all three of them were actually before Matan Torah, right? The Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim, Bris Milah with Avraham Avinu, Korban Tamid, if we're saying that they offered it at the desert, in the desert, before Matan Torah. So they were kind of all before Matan Torah, so that makes them kind of all in their own case, which is not right, which makes them different from Yibum, and therefore we still do not know how, we still don't know why we would assume that the positive commandment of Yevamo Yavo Alel would override the negative commandment of against sleeping with your wife's sister, which has a chiyuv kares involved. I don't necessarily have any reason to assume that the positive commandment of Yevamo Yavo Alel would override that negative commandment that has kares associated with it for sleeping with your wife's sister. Friends, we're going to end it over here, but I think that was a super interesting daf, friends. I mean, the first part of the daf, we discussed how we might be able to know that according to the rabbis, Ahsay is dokhe lo tasay, because unlike the Tana of Rabbi Yishmael, who says that the word beged already teaches me wool and linen, so the words wool and linen by shatnez in the pasuk and kiseitze are extra. But even according to so then we were asked, according to the rabbis, then how do they know that Ahsay is dokhe lo tasay? Because tzemer ufishtim is not extra in that pasuk for them. They needed to teach that shatnez is by wool and linen. So, but we tried a few different things, right? Maybe to teach by from a mitzora, that on the seventh day he shaves all of his head, even though that means he's going to be shaving off his payas. But ultimately, we had a difficult time proving it from mitzora. We ultimately went back to tzitzis as well, and even according to the rabbis, the word shatnez is extra. Right? It could have just said lo silbash tzemer ufishtim yachtav. Don't wear wool and linen together. The word shatnez is superfluous to teach us that it should be compared to tzitzis, to say that tzitzis, you can even make tzitzis out of shatnez. Then the Gemara says, okay, fine. So even if we say that Ahsay is dokhe lo tasay based on the halachos of tzitzis, but nonetheless, how do I know that we would even say Ahsay dokhe lo tasay when it's something that has chiyuv kares associated with it, such as by your wife's sister? If you sleep with her, that's a chiyuv kares. So how do we know that even there we would think to say that Ahsay is dokhe lo tasay? And that's kind of where we're up to. A shtickle cliffhanger. Peace out, friends.